Psychopathy is the worst of all the mental disorders, and yet is that the one that we reward by making them our CEOs, our business leaders, our religious leaders, our presidents, and so on? And what does it say about society if that's the mental disorder that we're rewarding, the one that gives the person no empathy, no remorse, no guilt?
My name's Osher Ginsberg. This is Better Than Yesterday, and you are about to get the absolute best moments from my conversation with the legendary journalist and author Jon Ronson, who spent 25 years inside the minds of people that most of us would probably rather avoid. Cult members, conspiracy theorists, extreme ideologues. He wrote a book, it's called The Psychopath Test, that reshaped pretty much how we look at authority. Now, over the next 15 minutes, Jon's going to break down how confident people talk themselves into dangerous ideas, what happens when two massive narcissists collide, and how to spot a psychopath who's running a Fortune 500 company. So let's start with the very uncomfortably yet terrifying truth about who might really be in control.
For people that might not have not seen your work or wondering how can a person become a business leader and be a psychopath, this thing that we're taught from all the horror movies to be afraid of, I'm going to hold, hang on, where is it? Okay, so I'm going to hold this phone in my hand, right? This phone, in the words of one of my favorite podcasters, Blind Boy, this phone is dripping in blood, all right? The amount of minerals that had to get mined in terrible conditions for this thing to get made is bonkers.
I thought you were going to say the amount of true crime podcasts you've been listening to. That's why it's dripping in blood.
But if you're the CEO of Apple, right, you know where this stuff comes from. And in your heart, in your brain, you're making a moral choice, profit over people. And you go, yes, I'll make the iPhone 17 Super Max. And there you go. Right. And you have to just switch the other empathy part off to make that money. And that's how you become the most profitable company in the history of the world.
So psychopaths make up 25% of the prison population, but they are responsible for 60 to 70% of unrest inside prisons. So move that to the business world.
Wow.
Let's say the head of Apple isn't a psychopath, but the head of a rival cell phone company is. That means everybody has to be a little bit more psychopathic to keep up. So they're smaller number, but the ripples are big.
Look, besides psychopaths, Jon has other interests, notably narcissists and ideologues. And unsurprisingly, politics is absolutely full of them. So Jon has spent decades up close with some of the biggest political figures on Earth. And he's noticed a very specific, almost explosive feedback loop that occurs when two extreme personalities just feed into each other's reality.
Yeah, I think narcissists are really interesting, especially kind of covert narcissists, the ones who you just don't know. It's kind of more interesting because they're not wearing it on their sleeves in the way that Trump does. But I think psychopaths are more interesting than narcissists because it's just a certain set of characteristics. This idea that all of the charm is superficial, there's nothing going on underneath. And they look and act like regular people, but some people would argue that they're nothing like regular people. They're more like predatory animals. The amygdala underperforms. They see the world in terms of predators and prey, and it would be foolish not to exploit weaknesses in others. And I think Trump probably is more likely to be a narcissist than a psychopath, although I don't know for sure.
What happens when the super confident narcissist meets the ideologue? What happens when that magic happens?
Right. Well, that's a very interesting question. And obviously that's what we're seeing. Trump speaking tonight, I was there 8 years ago in Cleveland. The most memorable line from that speech was, I alone can fix things. I alone can fix it.
Yeah. Because there's a thing that happens, and we've seen it throughout history, when a certain level of anxiety rises in a population about unemployment, about cost of living, about national security, about some moral panic sometimes. And this level of anxiety gets to this point, and no one in leadership is doing anything about it. And then a person comes along and says something like that, I alone can do this. And then there's this great sense of, oh, thank fuck for that. I don't care about everything else. I just want this icky feeling inside me to go away. Boom, you got my vote. And then now you get Silvio Berlusconi or what's his mate in Venezuela, and like These are all
Yeah.
democratically elected people. The whole strongman thing rises because of it. And I wonder, is the antidote to that teaching the populace more about down regulation and recognizing their own anxiety and being more rational and being inoculated to fear-based messaging?
Well, that's really interesting. So let me go back to Cleveland Republican Convention 2016. The reason why I was there was because my old pal, who I interviewed 30 years ago, Alex Jones, the conspiracy theorist, was there.
Yeah.
35 years ago, me and Alex Jones snuck into Bohemian Grove together and had this wild adventure. And I had no idea that one day he would have the ear of a president.
Wow.
And that goes back to that earlier thing that you said about when narcissists and ideologues meet. Because Trump and Alex really did enable each other's bad behavior.
Mhm.
I'm pretty convinced that Alex kind of gave Trump permission to be more conspiratorial, and Trump gave Alex permission to be more kind of xenophobic. Alex wasn't a xenophobe in his early days. His interest was things like, government overreach, Waco, Ruby Ridge, and so on. But suddenly when he hooks up with Trump, he starts talking about the Muslims, coming and taking over. And, his rhetoric completely changed. So then Trump was appealing to Alex's conspiratorial base. So yeah, that was it felt to me like a very toxic combination.
Two massive public figures just validating each other's alternate reality back and forth over time. That really does explain a lot of modern politics, doesn't it? It's an interesting way to look at it. By the way, if you're finding this conversation helpful, take a couple of seconds, hit a subscribe button or a like or a follow or whatever, however you're hearing my voice right now, because each week, twice a week, we pull the sharpest, highest value insights from our full episode. And by subscribing or following or rating or liking or whatever, it makes sure that you're never going to miss one. Now, the thing we were just talking about, that charming thing that happens when a narcissist and an ideologue walk into a bar. No, when a narcissist and an ideologue kind of fire off each other, that actually leads directly into how millions of everyday people end up sliding into parallel universes. I mean, since COVID, almost all of us have watched a friend or a family member or a colleague, someone we care about, just drift into an ideological bubble that's disconnected from a consensus reality. Now, Jon Ronson has taken the time to speak with more people in that space than certainly me. I'm going to guess you, probably nearly everybody. So what is it that we are drastically misunderstanding about those who walk among us, breathing the same air, etc., yet inhabit a completely different reality to the one that you and I are in right now?
Maybe we should think of people who believe, completely irrational things like QAnon or Pizzagate or Flat Earth. As maybe we should think of them more like religious believers, that these are symbolic beliefs, not real beliefs. Religious people tend not to act at home like God is watching them. They'll act in ungodly ways when they're not, when nobody sees them. So that means they're not real believers. It's more like a symbolic belief. And so maybe the same is true for the believers in QAnon and so on. However, at the same time, I would also say that we are all of us, not just people on the right, obviously, everybody is susceptible to conspiratorial thinking. Just look at what happened after the assassination attempt on Trump. Suddenly it was the left who were all saying, it's an inside job, it's staged, it's a post-flag operation, all the things that we've been mocking the right for all of this time. Another interesting thing I read was people reporting on the shooting at Pizzagate at the Comet Ping Pong restaurant in Washington, D.C., where the guy came in and, tried to rescue the kidnapped children who'd been like sex slaved by Hillary Clinton. The people reporting on that don't say something which is, that almost never happens. It almost never happens. There was loads of people in QAnon, and they didn't do that very often. It happens sometimes, true, but it doesn't happen that much. There's this whole thing on the left about how MAGA people and militia people are all white supremacists secretly plotting to kickstart an ethnic-based civil war. And I just don't think there's any truth to that at all. I think there's not very much racism in that world. It's much more an anti-government thing, an anti-institution thing. And the reason why people think that, academics on the left think that is because when civil wars start in other countries like Bosnia or Rwanda, it's always ethnic based, it's always tribal based. So if civil war is going to start in America, it must be ethnic based. So it's almost like a sort of false mathematical equation. So all of this is to say, maybe in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, this is going to seem very naive. I don't think anything particularly bad's going to happen. I don't think the right is going to kickstart some sort of civil war. In fact, if there's any political violence, it's going to come from the left. True, at Charlottesville, you had all of those Jews will not replace us. You've got a resurgence of anti-Semitism coming from the left as well as from the right. So I'm not saying it's like plain sailing, but what I am saying is that there's a certain amount of paranoia in thinking that all of these kids with, gun clubs in Michigan are all, plotting to start a civil war. That's just, overblown and not true and dangerous, because it means that, you demonize them and they get more and more angry, and, the problems are on both sides.
All right, look, I'll give you, it's not a very popular take, and it's probably going to piss a lot of people off. But coming from a person who has intimately interviewed people at the true extremes of left and the right and everywhere else there is, it's probably closer to the truth than anything else you're going to hear today. Which brings us to the last thing I wanted to play for you today, Jon's very personal and somewhat frightening observation from our conversation that we had, which you can find further back in the feed. Just scroll back, you can find the full discussion that he and I had. Jon's perspective as a Jewish journalist watching anti-Semitism rise across totally different political movements is actually fascinating, if not terrifying. So I wanted to know his thoughts about it. About what happens when someone says something harmful in public, either like in a public space, in a workplace, or writing it in a comment section, or publishing it in an article or a podcast or something. When someone does that, knowing that it carries a massive personal or even professional cost, are they expressing a deeply held belief? Or are they just desperate for belonging?
I think anti-Semitism, I'm Jewish, and so I've been sort of noticing, the sort of rise in anti-Semitism, especially since, October the 7th. But before too, David Baddiel wrote his book, Jews Don't Count, back in, 4 or 5 years ago, about how there was a rise of anti-Semitism on the left and how people conflate Israeli government policy with the Jews and so on in a way that you wouldn't do with other cultures. And that feels real. I've got to say. It feels like they really don't like us. It's really in their heart. And that's coming from both sides. It's coming from, from the right and the left. That's a kind of bleak way of looking at it, but that doesn't feel performative to me.
Because that thing itself is bananas. You've been in the homes of people. You've put yourself at great peril to go and speak with people who have quite publicly said, we want to kill people like you, or we support you not having any rights or anything like that. When you see, and I went to a gig, went to go see a mate's band play at a university here, and it was like 90 tents in the quadrangle, with all kinds of flags. And I saw pride flags hanging amongst Palestinian flags. And I'm thinking, like, do you know what happens? Come on, man. Like, you probably don't wear leather shoes because you're worried about the cows. What do you think is happening, and the dissonance that people are having to hold in their heads at the same time when they're trying to find the thing?
I actually live right on the Pride route in New York City. I've got an apartment, down in Greenwich Village. And so I saw that. I saw an awful lot of pro-Palestinian, banners. I couldn't work out whether some weren't like official Pride floats, some were like people infiltrating and trying to disrupt the march.
Right.
Yeah, that definitely was happening. But it's this idea that Judaism is equitable with white supremacy seems to be a kind of feeling among some people in the left. Sometimes it's just a slip. There was this big case in Britain of this incredibly anti-Semitic mural that turned up in Shoreditch or Hackney in East London. which had all the tropes of, the sort of Jewish bankers controlling the world. And Jeremy Corbyn, who was the head of the Labour Party at the time over here, liked the Facebook post about it. And I think that was two things at once. That was both, upsetting and disconcerting for Jews, but also arguably for some other people, it was a misunderstanding. Like some people were liking that picture, not realizing that there was all this anti-Semitic imagery in there. But yeah, the dissonance is it's upsetting. Like I find this all upsetting.
Oh yeah.
A friend of mine, somebody who I really like as a friend and admire as a person, gave an interview where they said that Jewish journalists in New York should declare whether or not they went to Israel as teenagers, so we would know whether or not to trust them because maybe they were brainwashed by the Israeli government.
Oh boy.
And that just, really disheartened me. I just thought you wouldn't say that about other minority groups.
You wouldn't say that about someone from Uganda.
No, you wouldn't say it about anyone. You would say it about Irish people. You wouldn't say it about Muslims. You would say it about anybody. So, that felt like a shift.
Yeah. How much of that kind of stuff is I'm saying this because I truly believe it, or I'm saying it because I want to feel a part of something? If I speak in this way, then these people who look powerful and look organized and look like they know what's going on, I get to stand with them because then I'll feel less alone than over here by myself, just worried.
That's certainly what was happening in the stories that I wrote about in my book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, about the sort of early days of what became known as cancel culture. And there was absolutely a sort of a sense of, group enjoyment. The main story of that book was the Justine Sacco story. She tweets, I go to Africa, I hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white. And then when she was asleep on the plane, my book sort of dissects everything that happened while she was asleep and oblivious. And absolutely all of these groups were just joyfully, supporting each other for, and egging each other on. And there was this sort of group joy. And it was so many groups, by the way, that night, everyone from kind of misogynists through to social justice people, through to hipsters, like all of these different groups are all having great fun, group identifying by destroying this person who was asleep on a plane and oblivious to everything that was going on. So yeah, I'd say in that book, it was very much about groups, about feeling part of a group, feeling part of something. And also thinking you were doing something morally right. It's no surprise that, many social scientists over the years have shown that people behave more violently when they think they're doing it in the service of a moral good.
He is one of the all-time greats. He's, up there with your Louis Theroux, Michael Moore, like whoever it is, like Jon Ronson. He's extraordinary. Jon has a rare ability to look directly into the messy and complicated parts of human nature and yet hold on to his empathy, his sense of humour and his humanity. That's why I love his work, because it helps me appreciate people that I otherwise kind of want to not listen to, but through the lens that he provides, I'm able to understand things a little better. His books and his podcast, they're masterclasses in this way of looking at the world. I'll put the direct links to his books and his other work in the description and the details. And you can also find their links for my live shows, which happen every couple of weeks, the books I've written, the audiobooks I've made, our weekly newsletter where you can get a free audiobook. It's all yours if you want it. Thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for spending time. If you found this useful, please like it or subscribe it or follow it or heart it or comment it or rate it or whatever it is, however you are here. It'd be wonderful if you could do that. And please, if there's a person in your life that you think, you know what, my friend would dig that, send it over to them. That really does a lot for us. Thanks for being a part of it. I'm back here on Wednesday.